Welcome to the Tired F1 pod. We are back and better than ever. Shez, how are you doing?
Same as always, super tired.
There we go. There we go. Now, the Melbourne Grand Prix was a really exciting one, okay? And as a Ferrari fan, I'm still living in the high of the high of the high of the enjoyment of that moment.
I'm
Um,
really happy for you, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And we had talked about this briefly in our race review, but I for one, I'll be honest with you, was not paying a whole lot of attention to it because I was just basking in the glory of a Ferrari 1-2. But
Why would you want to look at anything other than the
yeah.
front,
And
the front?
also, I mean, come
Yeah.
on, in my defense, it happened at the very end of the race too. At that point, I was like trying to celebrate the Ferrari win, and I now cut to George Russell being sort of upside down, essentially in his car, sideways. I was just like, there's just too much happening. I couldn't really process everything. But there was for those that may not know, George Russell was chasing Fernando Alonso, and it seemed like there was an overtake possible on the very last lap of the race. And I didn't get to see the whole thing, but from seeing the Ferraris sort of getting on the last lap to then I see Russell halfway through the track just sort of being upside down, and it turns out that he was chasing Alonso, and then there was a whole incident, right? And cut to the end of the race, and Fernando has received a 20-second penalty, a drive-through penalty that ended up being 20 seconds, and I've heard a lot in social media about it, so I do want to kind of dive deep into it and see where this was at. But I have to be honest with you, in the moment when I heard of Alonso's penalty, I didn't make much of it because I sort of took the opinion of that the stewards had looked at the data and they had talked to both drivers and they'd come to this conclusion. But
Well,
that
you
doesn't
you
seem to.
trusted the
I
stewards.
did. Can you believe that, right?
That
But there's
that
been a
already
lot.
seems like a weird starting
It
point.
is a weird stuff. It's a weird thing. I mean, look, the one thing that Formula One does a great job of is create controversies on track. They just seem to. I have this sort of conspiracy theory that they're doing this slightly on purpose. I'm not accusing them of anything, but just to get us talking about it
just
on
to
off
just to
race
spice
weekend.
things up. Yeah, maybe.
Exactly, exactly. Well, so what you've done some deep diving into this. What do you make of all of this?
I haven't done any deep diving.
Come
I've just
on, you
been looking at
dive
it.
deep into it.
But look, we are now nearly 7 days on from it, and people are still talking about this. So I did want to have a little look at why there's a question about the penalty and whether or not it was actually the right thing to do. And just to start, there seems to be a bit of a bit of polarization, right? There's a group of people that absolutely think that he deserved the penalty, and there's a group which, to be fair, is every current and ex-driver, and a lot of performance engineers as well that are like, this penalty is total nonsense. And in fact, one of the things I saw was Will Buxton had put up a poll, 20,000 respondents, asking, was the penalty too harsh? And 58%, not clearly resounding, but a majority nonetheless, thought that it was too harsh. So was it? Did
It's
Alonso get penalized too harshly? Before you answer that question, can we just dive a little bit into
yeah.
what the heck actually happened? So there we are at the end of the race. The only excitement at that point of the race, really, for anyone that wasn't Amar and the rest of the Tifosi, was what was going on
Everybody.
further. Yeah, what was going on further down the grid, and the closest battle was George Russell and Fernando Alonso. Fernando had just come out of his final pit stop and was just ahead of
Yeah.
George Russell, who was chasing him for, I think, seventh. Was it seventh?
It's just crazy. It really
I
is. It's
mean,
it's all worthless to just to see.
what are we talking about here anyway? So I was in the grandstand. I was on the straight following turn six, expecting to see either Alonso or George Russell come by, and I didn't see them. And suddenly on the big screen, I see George Russell upside down in the middle of the track,
Asking for a red
looking,
flag. Yes.
asking for a red flag. Um, and then I left the track thinking, George Russell, he's done it again. He's bungled his final lap as he did in Singapore.
Oof.
As Crofty
The crafty curse.
gave his blessing for that crash, as he did in Singapore. I thought this was just Russell's fault. But then, as we were leaving the track, there was more information coming through that perhaps Alonso had had a part to play. And we saw some telemetry. So again, I just want to give a shout out to our friend F1 Tempo,
Thank you.
who
Yeah.
does some brilliant telemetry analysis. So he's got a website with loads of telemetry on it, and it comes almost immediately, just like that. As soon as the wheel is turned and the sensor has been pinged, we get a telemetry trace, and that's all down to Tempo's hard work doing this. And I hope he gets a bit more recognition. And we'll put the link to his website and socials in the description below. But this particular bit of telemetry was spread far and wide. And what we're looking at is Alonso's final 3 laps. So we're looking at lap 55, lap 56, and lap 57. I've got 3 lines here. The white line is the orange line is lap 55. The white line is lap 56. And lap 57 is the line that we should all be looking at because it is odd. I've circled turn 6. This is where Alonso turns in for turn 6. And what you can see here is that on the speed trace, the speed markedly drops off much, much earlier on lap 57 than it does on lap 55 and lap 56. And there's a step in there as well. All right. So it's not just that it drops off and is just slower the whole time. There's a slowing, a step, and then it slows down again. Why? The answer to that is in the throttle and brake trace. This is what the stewards brought him up for. What they're saying is you can see that Alonso comes off the throttle and hits the brake much earlier in lap 57 than he does on any of the 2 preceding laps. But it's not just that he comes off the throttle and rolls into the corner and then picks up the throttle again at the exit. Nah. What he does is he slows down, but he slowed down so early that he thinks that he's not even going to make the corner. So he has to speed up again to make the corner.
He got himself slowing down too soon.
Right? So why would he do that? And he's admitted afterwards that he was trying to disrupt the guy behind him. He was trying to make George's life a bit more difficult to get him slowed up for the following corner. That raises the question, was this him braking and then speeding up again? Was it a brake test? Okay, maybe that's an extreme view, but he certainly was trying to disrupt the driver behind him. And if we take the argument that the stewards did, which was that this was erratic driving, this fits the description of erratic driving, for which there is a penalty, you'd have a hard time saying that it wasn't, because he did something that he didn't do on any other lap prior to that. And he's admitted afterwards that this is part of, he called it the art of driving, of trying to disrupt the guy behind him to make it more difficult to follow on the track, follow on the following straight. If you take it to the letter of the law, yes, but is there nuance in that? Alonso knew that he was going to be in trouble in the following straight if George just had a clean run at him, because he'd have DRS. But did he do the right thing? Was he within his rights to at least try something to disrupt the guy behind? Because that is what every former driver is saying, is that this is what they would have done, and it's up to the driver behind to try and avoid the accident.
So can I just say, before I respond to the question itself, I love Fernando Alonso for this is just like a reason
Me too. Love it.
50,001, right? Because I want him to keep racing forever. Like I vote for whatever it takes to get Alonso to keep racing as long as he wishes for.
Yeah,
because
me too.
this
Me
is
too.
just
I love this.
if you love this sport, this is the kind of stuff that really gets you excited. And I just love that he came up with this creative way of explaining it, which is just
Amar, it's so brilliant, right? That
it is
amazing. The problem with this is that clearly they've looked at the consequence, not the action.
Correct. Yes.
Because if George Russell doesn't, this is what you were going to say.
Yeah, exactly. No. You're exactly no. This is exactly what I was going to say. Like he came up with the perfect way, right? And so he is look, he's lost the battle, but he's won the war, right? Which is number one, it is the consequence that really sort of led to this, right? If George just goes off track, somehow manages to come back on track, and he's all discombobulated. But I think the next car back was Lance Stroll, correct? He was so far behind. George probably just keeps his position, and it's all done, right? But the fact that he was upside down, this was the last race, the last lap of the race coming up, really, and all of those elements combined, I think, just sort of led to this decision. And he has completely sold me on this, where initially I came into this like not even thinking about it as much, and I said, okay, whatever. They've looked at the data, but I think the argument is sort of right. Like, I mean, he had to make that move because in those previous laps, he wasn't being chased the same way. So of course he was going to make that move. And so I can see why drivers are lining up behind him, because this is a bit of an overreach, right? In my opinion, now having had to sort of read through everything and seen all the responses that, at least the driver community has given, it's like, so now you're going to tell me how to defend my position. And I'm not quite sure I agree with the word erratic. Like, look, he might have miscalculated, he might have misjudged the whole thing of slowing down and then speeding up. That part is fair, but I mean,
Okay,
it's not
so
like
that's
George was right behind him,
so,
right? So
so
I
that's
don't agree with the
that's
brake
so
test.
that's
Yeah,
the bit that I'm gonna call him up on, right? Is that he did make a misjudgment, and I
sure.
think that is what he's being penalized for. Because if he'd slowed down and kept that braking moment as the braking moment for the corner, then fine. But he's misjudged it so much that he's had to speed up again to get to the corner. That is probably what the stewards have looked at and said this is erratic driving. And the flip side to this is ultimately, would George Russell have had an accident if Fernando hadn't done that? You can argue that he wouldn't have. Like that accident doesn't happen if Fernando doesn't have that braking moment. But now
Mhm.
we need to look at the flip side to all of this, right? So Jolyon Palmer did a really good analysis of this for F1 TV, and he didn't just look at Fernando's telemetry; he looked at George's telemetry as well. So if someone brake tests you, right, or if someone brakes hard in front of you, and I don't mean, and I mean this on the road as well, not just on the track. What's your instant reaction going to be to that?
Hit the brakes hard too.
Hit the brakes hard. George Russell didn't do that. So Jolyon Palmer looked at his telemetry, and what you can see on his telemetry, we haven't brought it up here, although it is available if you guys want to look at it. Is George Russell did brake earlier for that corner, for turn 6, but he braked earlier for every corner preceding that as well, and he certainly wasn't being brake tested in any of those corners. So yes, I do think that the loss of downforce that George was subjected to, that his car was subjected to as a result of Alonso braking earlier, did contribute to him having an accident. But if George has seen that, why didn't he brake earlier? Because if he had braked earlier,
Yeah, exactly. I
he
mean,
has more control of his car and doesn't lose that downforce and doesn't end up in the wall. And this is the argument. So I saw a tweet from Brake, or Blake F1, who does who was Max Verstappen's former performance engineer. He is a great racing mind because he's lived it. And if you're not following him, what the heck are you doing? Go do it
follow him
now.
now. Yes. Yep.
But he made the point that, look, if this happened to his driver, he'd be questioning why the heck his driver didn't brake earlier. Why did he let himself end up in the wall? And that's the argument that I think most former drivers are now taking, which is that Alonso did what any driver would do to try and disrupt the guy behind. The guy behind should have braked.
Can I
Why
ask you
didn't he?
this? And then one thing that I found odd, and I don't know how to react to this, is Aston Martin chose not to appeal the penalty. Like that to me sounds weird. Like, okay, they might have very well lost, right? But to not appeal the penalty seems a bit strange. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean the problem is, right, is that is the rule itself, right? So the only former driver here that doesn't
Johnny
that
Herbert.
doesn't disagree with the penalty is Johnny Herbert, because he was the driver steward that was there. And I guess you have to look at the letter of the law and what they, we looked at this in our previous video, and in an unusual twist for the FIA. They've actually given a really
Giving us a
detailed
reason for a
reason
change, like
for why they did
it's
it.
not
And
because they felt that way.
maybe it's because they actually really had to defend this one, right? But they've said Article 33.4 is that if there is erratic driving, then the driver is subject to a penalty, and they have deemed what Alonso did erratic driving. He did choose to do something with whatever intent that was extraordinary, i.e., lifting, braking, downshifting, and all the other elements of the maneuver over 100 meters earlier than previously, are much greater than what was needed to slow for that
So,
corner.
yeah.
That's the argument that they're using, right? That he
It's
did something extraordinary, so we've given him a penalty because that then resulted in what happened behind him, even though they said that they didn't take the consequence into account. Nonsense. Of course they did.
the
No
consequences.
crash, no investigation. Let's be honest about this. But that's where their argument is. And you can see Alonso himself in the telemetry. We can bring the telemetry up again here. That after the incident, he's turned around, seen George Russell in the wall, and thought, I'm
He's
gonna be a
like,
crap for
I've
this.
outdone myself, and
So I'm gonna suddenly create
well,
an engine problem. And you can see him later on down the straight having
just
engine
amazing.
problems where he's
It's
coming
just
off the throttle.
you gotta love all of
And
this, man.
you know, he knew he was in trouble, and he started to fake a problem. So yeah, you could understand that both he and the steward probably had their hands tied, and perhaps this is a problem with the rule itself that just needs a bit of tweaking here to
So
allow for what is essentially just racing nous, and that is what we love about Fernando. I don't want to
yeah.
lose that. I agree.
Yeah. And so I do wonder, I mean, I think it's completely fair to accuse the stewards of looking at the result, but the result could have been potentially very, very bad. Seeing that, I mean, I guess even if George just ends up in the wall, right? Maybe this is not that big of a deal too. I think the fact that his car sort of half flipped over, was right in the dead smack in the middle of the racetrack, him looking like, you don't even want to kind of visualize what that would have happened had he been T-bone
But
really at that point. Yeah.
but ultimately, what this question comes down to is how much of that do we apportion to Fernando? Like, was he at fault for that happening?
I think it's
Is it his fault that his car created dirty air? Even the stewards didn't think that was his fault. He can't help it.
yeah.
Should George have braked earlier? Could he have avoided this whole incident by
He
just
he could have, and I
braking?
think this is fair criticism of him, right? Because I think there's a real question of whether he actually would have managed to overtake Fernando at all. Like it didn't look like he was close enough, and I think that's a bit of an indictment on his racing skills because we've seen two incidents of this, by the way, like this happening towards the end of a race, and they're eerily similar, albeit different circumstances,
Different
different
circumstances,
drivers,
yeah,
all of
yeah.
that. But I think if there's not been enough spotlight on what George did or didn't do, right, to sort of say that, we've argued in another setting of whether George is really the kind of guy to take over from Mercedes and upon Lewis's departure. And I think this would sort of go in that negative or con column, if you will, to say, hey, this has not been really good racecraft on his part, right? To sort of not be able to brake earlier himself. I don't know if he just seemed like, again, this is similar to Singapore in that he was so fixated on trying to get ahead that he wasn't
Have
sort
to.
of thinking through, right? So he just kind of went in there, and
Yeah.
man,
It's very task orientated.
very task oriented,
It doesn't look at the bigger picture.
and so
And
that's
I agree. I think this is something that George needs to work on. I think we're gonna have to come to a conclusion.
yeah.
Um, did he deserve a penalty? Yes or no? Quick fire answer, Omar.
No,
Okay, I'm going to say yes because I think if you're following the letter of the law, yes, I think he probably does deserve a penalty. But the question is, does that
spirit
rule
of the
need to
rule.
be changed?
Yeah, probably. I mean, but I
Probably.
don't,
I
I
say
don't.
yes.
Yeah. So, but
I say yes.
let's
I think
change
that
it.
needs
Let's change
tweaking
it and give a little bit more leeway for what,
to the
because
drivers. Yeah.
race, turns, drivers, all of that has to factor in as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. There you go. And on that bombshell, like, comment, subscribe. We love you guys. We love to hear what you want to say. We read everything, and we comment as much as we can.
Later.